The man who said, I go out as a missionary, not that I may follow the dictates of common sense, but that I may obey that command of Jesus Christ. It was said by James Gilmour. He is called as the apostle to Mongolia. James Gilmour was a Scottish Protestant missionary who served in China and Mongolia with the London Missionary Society. Initially worked in China, then later moved to Mongolia. He had heroic efforts to preach the gospel to Buddhist, and he actually went traveling a lot in the plains of Mongolia. And in winter, he used to come back to China. His wife, who lived with him for 11 years, died in 1885, and after that, also, he served for 6 years. At the age of 47, after 21 years of missionary life, he died in Mongolia. James Gilmour was the third of the six boys that James and Elizabeth Gilbert had. He was born near Scotland. His grandparents also were very strong believers. They took worship and God's work so seriously. His mother read missionary stories, and that had a huge impact on James. He is a man who loved nature. His mother's reading of the stories later led him to be who he was. He went to the Glaxo University at the age of 19. He was an outstanding student. His parents were well off, so they could send him for the education. But Christianity was not just a mere classroom exercise. Evenings he used to go talk to the workers as they walked home, reminded of them about their soul. He was very bright, and about Latin and Greek he had good grip. His time management was so good. He never willfully lost even 1 hour, you know. And that he was against all the intoxications, drinking that happened in the college. Once he called on a classmate who had a beer in his room. Young Gilmour quietly raised the window as he poured out the beer into the street and said, better on God's earth than on his image. At the age of 24, he offered himself to the London Mission Society. Then he entered into Highgate Mission Society to study. Then he was ordained in Augustine Chapel. And then he went into studies on missions, Chinese language. And later he was sailing to Liverpool. He was made the chaplain of the ship. At night time, he talked to every member of the crew while on watch and laid the matter of salvation so clearly before them. He afterwards wrote like this: all on the board had repeated opportunities of hearing the gospel as plainly as I could put it. At the age of 27, 1870, he sailed to China, planning to work in Mongolia. Soon after his arrival, 22 priests were massacred. Gilmour was willing to die if it advanced God's work. But unfortunately, there was calm. Then he later moved to Mongolia. During that time, one night they decided to kill all the Europeans. He wrote, we are all living on the slope of a volcano that may put forth in its slumbering range at any moment. Though lion-hearted and not thinking of leaving the field, situation was so grave that he wrote again, our death might further the cause of Christ more than our life could do. A massacre of all foreigners was planned. But because of a great outpour of rain, on the first day, that plan was shut down and they were safe. The problem in China led him to Mongolia, and there he engaged years working for the Lord, but initially it was fruitless evangelism. The common flock accepted him because he came with all the goods on his back, like normal people. Gilmour stayed in a person's home for 3 months and he learned the Mongolian language so well and how the natives behave. His expenditure was so less, it was just 6 cents a day that he used to spend. but with much poverty. Eventually, he used to ride on a mule, save money, and he never traveled on camel. He healed many people with simple remedies, and medicine was a big tool by which he touched many people. His marriage story was beautiful. At the age of 29, he got married. He prayed for a helper. He saw a portrait of a woman in the house. They were talking about her. He wrote a letter to her, and she, praying for guidance, was convinced that this is from the Lord, even without seeing him, Gilmour. She agreed, and she braved to come to Mongolia, got married, and went with him everywhere. She learned the language. She taught the Chinese people. 11 years they were married. Three sons were born, one died, and after that, after 11 years of marriage, Gilmour stayed another 6 years. They were very happily married, and he wrote about her. She is a jolly girl, as much, perhaps more, of a Christian and a Christian missionary than I am. Few mission details. Once a reverend came with Gilmour and 5 days distant into Tenston, a district where famine was stricken, he preached. They preached actually to 130 to 300 people. They were very eager to sing songs, and Gilmour sang songs, and he understood it's very powerful way to introduce Christ through songs. His messages were very simple, full of illustrations, lot of life and earnestness, direct with great force. In between, he came to England, and he said something like this, which was very touching, that why we should pray for missionaries. Unprayed for, I feel very much as if diver were sent down to the bottom of the river with no air to breathe, or a fireman set to put down the fire in a building with an empty hose. I feel very much like a soldier who's firing blank cartridges at the enemy. That was the importance of prayer in his life. His wife actually once journeyed 156 days continuously in Mongolia. In between, he went back to England, wrote a couple of books. One was Among the Mongols, which was so great. His first convert took a long time to come. After his wife's death, the two children were sent back uh, to study. And the church had a lot of evils: tobacco, opium, whiskey. Gilmour took strong stand for people to deny it. See, during his last days, once in 8 months, he saw 6,000 patients, preached nearly to 24,000 people. He sold about 3,000 books, distributed 4,500 tracts, traveled 1,860 miles, spent about $200, and sadly, just two people came to Christ. This man never gave up. He came to England back in 1890, saw his children, and for a mission conference in 1891 to continue his work, he came back to Mongolia, where he was honored. And the same year, in Dr. Robert's house, he fell sick, a malignant type of fever, and he died. When the news of his death was circulated in Mongolia, strong grown-up men wept like children when they were all told Gilmour was dead, and he died in May 21st, 1891.